Hello and welcome back to week 3, unit 3 of our OpenSAP course Touch IoT with SAP Leonardo. This unit is about the importance of prototyping. While this unit was originally part of our previous course Imagine IoT, what is captured here about prototyping is still very relevant when you're creating your own Internet of Things prototype. So even if you watched this unit once before, we thought it is best to include it again to refresh your knowledge on this topic. And for many of you, this will be your first time experiencing it. One last point. In the unit, which follows right after this one, I will explain in more detail everything you have to know about the upcoming prototype challenge. But without further delay, please now enjoy this unit on prototyping. 2 units ago, you already learned about the 5-step approach model of design thinking. If you remember, prototyping was one of those steps. To be exact, it's the 4th step. I'm sure you're still familiar with this graphic. Like mentioned in the design thinking unit, prototyping is a very important step within this process. But also especially within this course, as our course challenge asks you to prototype your own IoT application. So this is why we're going to dig a bit deeper and get into the prototyping step in more detail. Okay, so let's quickly recap what prototyping means. And let's start with some definitions. There's a standard definition from Wikipedia, and then there's a Twitter definition. A prototype is an early sample, model, or release of a product built to test a concept or process, or to act as a thing to be replicated or learned from. So, as you might have guessed, that was the official definition. However, Twitter says a prototype is worth 1,000 meetings. Have you ever had someone describe a movie scene to you, but then when you actually watch the movie, your reaction is more like, "Oh yeah, I get it now." That can be what a prototype is like. Once you see a prototype in action, it is much more valuable than someone describing to you what their idea might look like if they were to build it. Therefore, you can also say it's a tool for helping you paint a picture with more than words. So why again are we prototyping? Well, the goal is simple. We want to demonstrate to stakeholders and users in our own internal team what any given piece of functionality will look like, and how someone can interact with it. Here are some examples for advantages in prototyping. First, prototypes make your design better and are also facilitating communication. Prototypes enable user input and usability assessment. And lastly, prototypes help assess technical feasibility and reduce development time. I want to mention one more point in regards of the question, why to prototype? The cost factor. So let's take a look at why discovery and design are critical phases in the end-to-end app creation process. If you just think about it logically, moving from left to right in the process, making changes, iterating or failing is much easier the earlier you are in the process. As the graphic here shows nicely, the earlier you iterate on your design, the cheaper it is. Making changes during development or deployment is very expensive comparatively. You're dealing with lines of code, data integration, backend configuration, and much more. And each time you make a change based on user feedback, that all has the potential to break all the pieces you've already put together, based on earlier assumptions. Which brings us back to just how important prototyping can be. Okay, so now let's see what different kind of prototypes are out there, and when you should pick which particular type. So the first type I want to mention is the wireframe prototype, or low-fidelity mockup. It's a simple sketch of a user interface. It's quick, anyone can do it, you only need paper and a pencil, changes are easy to make, you can throw it away without feeling bad about the time spent, and it helps you to focus on what's really important in terms of what you're trying to solve. The other nice thing is that it allows you to quickly explore many ideas for the same problem. Here you can see 3 timesheet prototypes, all trying to accomplish the same thing, but all doing it very differently. Sometimes you don't know which one is the best one until you've made a few and gotten feedback from those around you. The next type of prototype I want to mention is the high-fidelity mockup, which is like a wireframe but often with more detail and some color. It can also follow a certain style or template to give it more familiarity to the end user. In this case shown, this is a high-fidelity mockup that's meant to look like a Fiori app. Now, as I mentioned, it's especially important to test the experience of your end user. Generally speaking, mockups put together become a more valuable prototype when you give it to someone and gauge their initial interactions with it. Prototypes can be just a single screen mockup, but often prototypes are 2 or more screens connected to each other, somehow to simulate a flow or change state based on user interaction. So in this example, you can see that you might start with an initial screen and then move through a few more to simulate the process of timesheet entry. But let's now talk about how the feedback which you receive will influence your prototype. As you get more and more feedback, your designs will evolve upwards and get closer and closer to a high-end prototype. And hopefully you'll always be making progress towards accomplishing what it is you're solving for. And keep in mind, this iterative process is all before you touch one line of code. As with anything else, there are some pitfalls to watch out for. The most common traps are, for instance, taking feedback as requirements. The feedback we receive from prototyping is almost always extremely helpful. However, it's easy to confuse great feedback with new requirements. Stay on task and keep a watchful eye on the scope of the project. The second pitfall is to watch out for that you prototype everything. We love prototypes, and because of their effectiveness, it's easy to start throwing prototypes at every concept. It's important to realize that they are not necessary for every project or for every component. Use your judgment as to when to pull prototypes into the fold. And the last one, ignoring feasibility. It's become so easy to prototype complex functionality that sometimes it's easy to lose sight of what's feasible. Time, cost, and platform restrictions need to be considered when creating and reviewing prototypes. Okay, so let's quickly sum up what we've learned in this unit. We started off with a quick recap on how prototyping is the 4th step of design thinking. Then we talked a bit about different kinds of prototypes, like wireframes and high-fidelity mockups. I mentioned that as you get more and more feedback, your design will get closer to a high-end prototype. And then finally, I warned you of the most common pitfalls you should watch out for when creating your first prototype. Thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you soon.